Now, just like with any service, installing a new role onto a machine requires actually installing that role and its associated role services. We'll do that here in our environment to the server file1.company.pri. Now, different from that last module where I actually went through and just installed the role for you so you didn't have to see it, there is one additional screen in here in the Add Roles and Features wizard that I want you to pay particular attention to. So if I come here to the server roles, the list here, and then choose to add in the WSS role and all the associated role services and features that it requires, we need to come down here to our role services view, all the way down here, right there. Because it's here where we have the opportunity to make a decision about how we want to store the database WSS uses for containing the information that it requires. Now, by default, and in most situations, the Windows internal database is just a perfect location for your WSS database. In certain circumstances, however, you may have need to back up the database, or you may have requirements for that backup. You may have requirements for disaster recovery of WSS. You may just be required to install all databases on some other version of a Windows database. And so for any of those circumstances, you would not install WSS to the Windows internal database, but instead down here to database, which corresponds to essentially to a copy of SQL Server that is either on this machine or some other machine in your environment. We will install Windows or WSS here to our Windows internal database because, again, in most situations, the Windows internal database provides all that's necessary to get WSS up and operational for all but the largest of environments, really. In addition to that, we have to determine where we want to store the content that WSS will be using. So this is the actual update files that will come down from Microsoft.com. We need to choose a valid local path on file 1 or a remote path, which I will put on the E drive here, which I believe I have on this machine. Yes, the E drive, as the location where we'll store that content. So EWSS. Once we're done with that, the rest of the wizard here is relatively straightforward in that we go about installing all the different pieces that are necessary, most of which have to do with IIS, in order to get WSS up and operational. So let me go through here and complete this installation, and then accelerate things just a bit so that we can get through to the much more interesting part, which is the post-install configuration of WSS. Notice here there is this link called Launch Post-Installation Tasks. This Launch Post-Installation Tasks view gives me the ability to then go through that post-installation config here for WSS. Clicking that link goes through a relatively extended period of time, a couple of minutes where you don't really see much. But as you can see here, after a short period of time, really measured in minutes, you'll see now that that post-installation configuration has been successfully completed. We still do have a couple of things we have to do, obviously. We've got to configure WSS to operate in the way that we're looking for it to do. So in order to accomplish that, let's come back here under Tools and then go down to Windows Server Update Services and take a look at a few more of these post-installation configs that are necessary. One of the very first things you'll see the first time you try to launch the console here is this configuration wizard that WSS will make available for you. It's here where we can make some of the decisions about how we want this server to get its information, how we want it also to disseminate that information, and then also what kinds of information we care about, what kinds of languages, what kinds of products, what kinds of classifications that we're interested in using the server for. Now, this process actually requires a couple of steps, and in part because, as you can imagine, Microsoft is constantly releasing new updates for new products. And so the information that WSS has here, as far as just the kinds of updates it is aware of, needs to itself be first updated before you can go through determining which classifications of updates you're interested in. Let's go through this wizard here by joining the Update Improvement program and then determining here where we want to synchronize our updates from. Here in just a minute, we'll talk a little more about WSS synchronization across multiple different WSS servers. But for now, let's assume that we have a single WSS server, the very first in our environment, and that this server will synchronize from Microsoft Update. I'll choose Next here, and I won't choose a proxy server because I have no outbound proxy server requirements in this environment. And it's here in the next screen where WSS then needs to complete an initial synchronization in order to understand exactly what kind of updates are available so that I can make the appropriate selections. I'll click here the Start Connecting button to go through the process of essentially just connecting up with Windows and figuring out what those new categories are. And then once we have that updated metadata, we can use that information to help us determine what exactly it is that we're interested in updating. Let me come down here to Next, and then it's here where we can choose the languages that we're interested in. Curious little piece of trivia, some of the earlier instances or versions of WSUS had far more than just US English as the available language that was selected by default here in the interface. However, that decision on Microsoft's part actually created a bit of a problem for early WSUS implementors because each additional language you select adds a significant amount of additional data that has to be downloaded every time you download an update. If you think about it, there's an update for English, there's an update for French, and another one for German. So be very careful here with this screen. Do not select the top item up here unless you're absolutely sure that you require it, because downloading updates only in the languages you require will greatly reduce the amount of disk space you'll need to store those updates locally. As you can see here, at least for this version, the English language is the only one that is selected. That's the only one I'm interested in here today. Also, in terms of the number of products that you're interested in downloading, it's generally a good idea to right-size the number of products that you're selecting with the ones that you actually have. And so what this means is that if you don't have, I don't know, a BizTalk server in your environment, well, then you probably don't want to be downloading the updates for BizTalk server. If you go through and just simply select all the updates here, you may find yourself a little overburdened with the sheer amount of content that has to be downloaded here into your local server and then updated on a regular basis. We will, just because we want to keep things simple here, come down here to the bottom and make sure that the Office updates are included, but not just Office in every version, Office only in the version that we're using in this environment, so Office 2013. As well as down here for Windows, we want to make sure that Windows is updated as well. Notice how every single version of Windows is available, but that's probably more than we need. So let's remove the checkbox here for Windows and just download the updates for Windows Server 2012 R2. Again, that will greatly reduce the amount of updates that you have to keep under management. And trust me, as we get a little later on into just the total list of available updates you'll have to keep an eye on, you will very much thank yourself for not having to sort through pages upon pages of updates that have nothing to do with your environment. So I'll select these two, again, just to keep things simple here. And it's here in this next screen where I can identify the types of classifications for the kinds of updates that I want to keep under management. Critical updates, definition updates, and security updates here will help you for those MSRC alerts that pop out on every Patch Tuesday. If you have a need for example, service packs or feature packs, you can add them. A lot of people don't necessarily include the drivers for a lot of very good reasons. A lot of time your manufacturer drivers are going to be more updated than those you'll see here in Microsoft Update. But these provide you, again, the ability to determine exactly what you're interested in. I tend to, at least at first, leave these as the defaults because at least it gets me through that monthly patch cycle that has to do with protecting myself against security-related incidents. Then lastly here is where I can identify how often I want WSUS to synchronize itself with Microsoft. It is generally a good idea to go through an automatic synchronization at least once a day, if not more. Microsoft tends to release these updates on an every month cycle, although in later months and years, there's been a bit of a sea change for Microsoft releasing updates faster than what has for many years been the traditional second Tuesday of the month Black Tuesday release of new updates. I'll set our first synchronization here to be sometime early in the morning, so it happens when I'm not around and other people are not attempting to use this file server, and I'll set a single synchronization per day at that time. I'll choose Next here, and then to begin the initial synchronization, Next again, and Finish to begin the implementation of WSUS. It is at this point that you'll probably just want to pause things to ensure that you complete that initial synchronization before you go any further into configuring WSUS for your clients.